Bye Bye Barry is a documentary about one of the greatest running backs in NFL history, Barry Sanders, who played on the Detroit Lions in the late 80s, early 90s. He was a hero of mine because I am a Detroit Lions fan. And while I grew up in Detroit, Detroit is a very blue collar, working town. And they're the hometown heroes for me, and I watched the Detroit Lions when I was a kid. I have so many fond memories of watching the Detroit Lions with my dad, watching games on television. Also, when I moved to California, after every Lions game, my dad and I would talk on the phone. I feel that one of the things that, men may not be great about talking about their feelings, but they'll talk about sports and their feelings. And I almost feel like in some subconscious way, men communicate through sports. Like that's a way that men can communicate is through their love or loathing of sports. And this is the story of Barry Sanders, who had this illustrious career, but never got to the big game. Got very close. In the early 90s, I would watch Barry Sanders, and my God, when you watched him play, it was like his legs were made of rubber. And he would do this thing where there would be a defensive person right in front of him, and he would just pivot and go this way, so that person would end up tackling air. It's an archival documentary that's supplemented by new footage. So you've got archival documentary footage of when Barry was drafted by the Detroit Lions, when he won the Heisman Trophy, when he broke the 2,000 yards in a year rushing record. So it's all of this archival footage of Detroit from that time, supplemented by new interviews with Barry Sanders and his family and his relationship with his father. So many things I didn't know about Barry Sanders. One thing everybody knows about Barry Sanders, whether you're a fan or not, is how humble he was. We live at a time now where sports figures are, in these rock star positions, spouting opinions that are, maybe not super uniting or helpful. Barry Sanders, as a player, and the Detroit Lions at that time as a team, united the city of Detroit. And even though I moved to the West Coast in 1989, I always watched the Detroit Lions, and it was a way for me to talk and relate to my father. My father passed away in 2012. Not a great year for me, and I miss those conversations between my father and I. So, to me, watching the Detroit Lions reminds me of my relationship with my dad. If the Detroit Lions, which are on a good run this year, if they make it to the Super Bowl, I'm going to the Super Bowl. If the Detroit Lions ever get into a Super Bowl, I am going to the Super Bowl. I'm at least going to be there. I don't know. It's a bucket list item for me, is to go to a Super Bowl. If the Lions make it in, I'm going to go there as a tribute to my dad. I'll just say this. I know I may be speaking personally and from the heart on this, but it's an excellent documentary. I'm the type of guy that, like, okay, and I know this is weird because many of you know me as a nerd. Oh, Gore, he's such a nerd. He's into Star Wars. You're always talking about Star Wars and Star Trek and nerd stuff. Yes, I get it. I am also a sports fan. And what I miss about it, which this movie reminds me of, is how many great lessons come from sports. Barry Sanders, via the Detroit Lions and that team at that time, united the city of Detroit. And what's amazing, the lessons we get from sports and also from our U.S. military is that we can come from all walks of life, all levels, economic levels, rich, poor, whatever. And we can come together and work towards a common goal. People who look very different can work towards a common goal. We have somehow forgotten these lessons. This movie reminded me of that. It brought back that feeling I had. And, I used to buy, they would do this every year, right? Like for every team and every year they do this, NFL films. I'm a huge fan of NFL films, to the point where I've actually bought the soundtrack for NFL films, the frozen tundra. And you hear that announcer's voice. NFL films changed. Steve Sable and that whole team, I know who they are. I know the behind the scenes. They changed the way that we see the game when they showed things in slow motion. Watching Barry Sanders in slow motion is like watching ballet on the field. It's insane. No one moved like him. It was crazy. But I would always buy those VHS cassettes of 1994 Detroit Lions. It was a tough season. And it's like a 30 or it's like an under hour little mini documentary about that season. And I would buy those every year. I loved it. This is a great documentary that imparts lessons. And Barry Sanders, he's the one that there's a term that you heard. Jeff Daniels is actually in the documentary. So they interviewed Jeff Daniels, who is also probably the most famous person in Michigan, the actor Jeff Daniels from Dumb and Dumber and many other things. He's a huge Detroit Lions fan. And it's Barry Sanders, really the term. When he would get into the end zone and score a touchdown, he would just hand the football to the ref. And what you say is you act like you've been there. He's not doing, you never saw Barry Sanders ever do like a touchdown dance or whatever, or ever taunt the other team by celebrating. He got in the end zone. He handed off the ball. He did his job. Such a humble man, and really an icon in the NFL. And also just a reminder of some of the great lessons you can learn from sports, whether you're a sports fan or not. Sports and sports movies, for that matter, teach us lessons. And this I just thought it was fantastic. It's one of the best sports documentaries I've seen, and I can't remember when. It's currently on Amazon Prime. 9 out of 10 for me. Whether you're a Detroit Lions fan or not, you've got to recognize Barry Sanders as a player.
You sound very biased in this review.
I am very biased because I'm a Detroit Lions
biased
fan.
in this review.
Spoken like a Lions fan.
Yeah.
Says Jim BLA. Look, I've got the
I'm trying. I don't know that I got a good impression as to whether this documentary was good or not.
Yeah, I'll just say this. Even if you're not a Lions fan, it's a beautiful story. Barry Sanders also, what the documentary does is it tells you his personal story. He just left the game. No fanfare, no big retirement press conference. He sent in a fax and said, I'm retiring from the Detroit Lions. So just a sports hero to be admired, and a man from a different era.